everyone. We are continuing our learning of Sefer Yirmiyahu. We are up to Perek Lamed Daled. In Perek Lamed Beis and Lamed Gimel, we were talking about prophecies that Yirmiyahu had when he was in prison in the 10th year of Tzidkiyahu. And he was imprisoned because he was giving people the message that the Babylonians will be victorious and the Yidden should not fight, and if they do fight, the city will be destroyed, and Tzidkiyahu will be taken prisoner, which indeed was the case. And Tzidkiyahu imprisoned him because he was undermining confidence in the fight, and he was treated as being disloyal and a Novi Sheker. Now, Perek Lamed Daled seems to be earlier, because Perek Lamed Daled actually seems to be before Yirmiyahu is in prison, and Tzidkiyahu is trying to galvanize people to fight against the Babylonians. This is where Yirmiyahu gives the actual message that resulted in his being in the Chatzar HaMatzara. So as we've seen already a number of times in the book of Yirmiyahu, Ein Muktam Umu'uchar Batorah or Banovi, and therefore this is actually the events that may have precipitated his imprisonment during the reign of Tzidkiyahu, who will be waging war against the Babylonians over the objection of the Navi. And we're not given the exact year of Tzidkiyahu's reign. Pasuk Aleph, Hadavar Shahayal Yirmiyahu Me'es Hashem, Unevuchat Retzar Melech Bavel Chol Chelo Chol Mamlechos Aretz Memshelas Yadei V'Chol Ha'amim Nilchamim Al Yerushalayim. This was a nevuah that Yirmiyahu gets at a time when Nebuchadnezzar, with all of his army, is waging war against Yerushalayim and the surrounding cities, Lamor, and this is the message that Yirmiyahu was given. As far as we can see, at this point he is not in the Chatzar HaMatara, the prison. Pasuk Beis, Kayamar Hashem Elokei Yisrael, so says God, the God of Israel, Halaych v'amarta el Tzidkiyahu melech Yehuda. Go and give Tzidkiyahu, so go implies again, he's not in prison. Go and give Tzidkiyahu the following message. V'amarta elav, Kayamar Hashem. Your attempt to fight the Babylonians because you're told that God is on your side is wrong. Hineni nosein esoir hazais biyad melech Bavel. Behold, I am delivering this city into the hands of the king of Babylonia. Usrafa ba'esh, it shall be burnt with fire, destroyed. Viata lo simolek miyado, and even if you're a king that has his own avenues of escape, as we will read later, you will not escape. Ki tafos titafes, you will be seized. Ubiyado tinasen, you will be given over to his hand. V'einecha es einei melech Bavel tirena, and your eyes will see the king of Babylonia, although he'll later be blinded. Upiu es picha yedaber, and his mouth will speak to your mouth. Ubavel tavai, and you will be brought to Bavel, and you will die in Bavel. Ach, Shema devar Hashem Tzidkiyahu melech Yehuda, but Hashem has one word of comfort. Kayamar Hashem alecha. Lai samus b'charev. You will be taken to Bavel as a prisoner. And, although it doesn't say it here, but we'll know from a later nevuas, you will be blinded in Bavel. But you will not be killed by the sword. You will die naturally. B'shalayim tamus. Because it mentions that the day that Tzidkiyahu was imprisoned, the day that Nebuchadnezzar died, Tzidkiyahu was released. He died a day after Nebuchadnezzar. And the Yidden that were in Bavel buried him in a very respectful and dignified and kavadika manner. That's Hashem's promise. You will not die by the sword. Bashalom tamus, you will die in peace. Ubemisrafais aveisecha hamlochim harishainim asher hayu lefanecha kain yisrafulach. There was a minhag, something we don't fully understand, that when kings would die, people would burn all of the king's possessions, as if to say, like the clothing and the like, that no one can use this because it belonged to the king. And since this was done Makavad HaMelech, there is no Isser of Bal Tashchis, because it's a way of expressing kavod. And the Navi is telling Tzidkiyahu that the same burnings that were made in honor of your ancestors, who were kings, they will burn things in your honor as well, albeit in Bavel and not Eretz Yisrael. That's why it doesn't say you will be buried where your ancestors are buried, because you won't. You'll be buried in Bavel, but there will be a sereifa. V'hoi adain yispedulach, and they will eulogize you in a very dignified way. Hoi, alas, for the master, titles of kavod, as opposed to the burials that are very quick and unnoticed. Ki davar andi dibarti Hashem, because that is my promise to you. Because Tzidkiyahu, the emes, was personally a righteous person, but he was afraid of the people, and he sometimes gave in to their demands. That's why he imprisoned Yirmiyahu, although he knew Yirmiyahu was a Navi emes. But he was acting at the demand of the people. So Hashem gave him a promise that his kavura would be bekaved. Vayidaber Yirmiyahu and Navi al Tzidkiyahu melech Yudeis kol hadvarim ha'ele b'Yerushalayim, and Yirmiyahu gave Tzidkiyahu this message. And this is the middle of this war of V'cheil melech Bavel nilchamim al Yerushalayim al korari Yehuda hanesaris. And the armies of Nebuchadnezzar are waging war against Yerushalayim and against all of the cities of Yehuda that haven't already been destroyed by Sancheriv. Lachish and Azekah, these are two cities. Kihena, Nisharu, Bi'ari Yehuda, Ari Mifsar. These were still fortified cities that were remaining. So all of these things are happening when Yirmiyahu gives the nevuah to Tzidkiyahu. Pasuk Ches, Hadavor Sher Hayil Yirmiyahu Meis Hashem Achrei Kreis Melech Tzidkiyahu Bris Es Kol La'am Asher B'Yerushalayim Likro Lem Dvar. Now here, what is being recorded is an attempt, we're not given the year exactly, of Tzidkiyahu to bring people to tshuva. And this is referring particularly to the halacha of Eved Ivri. A Jewish slave, whether he was sold because of theft, or whether he sold himself because of poverty. By the way, you don't get sold into slavery for not paying a debt. You either have to steal or you sell yourself. The Torah says such an Eved works only 6 years, and the 7th year he must go free. And if Yovel is earlier than that 7th year, he also goes free. Now again, this does not mean he goes free in Shemitah. It's not a question of Shemitah, it's 6 years. So even if Shemitah is in the middle, he does not go free on Shemitah, but he goes free the beginning of his 7th year. Apparently, there were many wealthy landowners who had Jewish slaves, and they did not free the slaves in the 7th year. Tzidkiyahu, one of the tikkunim that Tzidkiyahu is trying to do, is to make those landowners give liberty to their slaves. Pasuk Tes says, L'shalach ish es avdo, v'ish es shivchaso ho'ivri v'ivriya, chofshim, free. L'vilti avod bam b'Yehudi achiyu ish, that one Jew should not enslave another Jew beyond the period. And the pasuk says, "Vayishmu kol asarim b'cholam asher bo bebris." So he made people make a covenant, a swearing, an agreement. All of the officers and all of the people that entered this covenant, l'shalach ish es avdo v'ish es shivchaso chavshim, to free their slaves, levilti avod bam od, not to work with them, vayishmu vayishalechu, and they fulfilled that. So far so good. But what happened was, vayashuvu acharei chen, vayashivu es ha'avadim v'es hashvachos, asher shilchu chavshim v'yichbeshum li'avodim v'lishvachot. Now again, I'm not sure how this worked exactly, but after they had sent their male servants or female servants free, based on a bris, a covenant, a commitment that they made to Tzidkiyahu, they then just recaptured the people, I'm not sure how it worked, like a kidnapping, and made them slaves again. So Yirmiyahu is given a nevuah, a message from Hashem, about this particular avla. Vayihi devar Hashem el Yirmiyahu mi'es Hashem leimor, Kayamar Hashem Elokei Yisrael, Anoichi karati bris es avoseichem, b'yayim haitzi yisam me'eretz Mitzrayim beis avodim leimor, I made a covenant with your forefathers, the day that I took them out of Mitzrayim, leimor, declaring, Miketz sheva shonim, Tishalchu ish es achiv, ha'ivri, asher yimacher lecha. Now, miketz normally means at the end of 7 years. Now, that's not true. A slave does not go free at the end of 7 years. A slave goes free at the beginning of 7 years. So, the Mefarshim actually say an interesting thing, that the word ketz does not have to mean end. Ketz just means the extremity. So ketz can be the beginning or the end. So when it says miketz, from the edge of 7 years, that actually means the beginning of the 7th year, not Shemitah, but the 7th year from the time they were sold. I commanded you to send them free at the beginning of the 7 years. You should only work for 6 years. And there were generations before you who were not keeping this law, and now you're doing the same thing. Now, a little bit of another kasha here. Pasuk Yud Gimel says, I made this covenant the day that I took you out of Mitzrayim. Now, l'chari, that's not emes. The mitzvah in the Torah that says a slave, only an Eved Ivri, only works 6 years and goes free in the 7th year, is in Parshas Mishpatim, which was after Matan Torah. So how can there be a statement that this was the covenant that I made biyom, when I took you out of Mitzrayim? So the pashtus is, in more of a situation, that the day I took you out of Mitzrayim, you became my slaves. And that's mechayev you to obey everything that I commanded you at Matan Torah. But be it as it may, your forefathers violated this. Pasuk Tesvav, Vatashuvu atem hayom, V'tasu esayosher b'einai likra droyish l'reis. On one hand, you're doing tshuva that you set them free. V'tichusu bris l'fanai b'bajan ikush mi'alav, and in the Beis Hamikdash, you swore a covenant and an oath. So I thought you were doing tshuva, and yet, Vatashuvu v'techalulu es shmi, you went back and you desecrated my name, meaning not only are you committing the Aveira of keeping them as slaves, but you desecrated my name by swearing falsely in my name. Shvuas sheker. Vatashivu ish es avdei, v'ish es shivchasei, asher shilachtem chavshim l'nafshem. You already sent them free. And you're conquering them, you're holding on to them to be avadim and shvachais. L'chein kayamar Hashem atem lo shamatem elai likra dewar ish liyachiv yish l'reyehu. You did not listen to me to proclaim liberty to the slaves. You did not proclaim deror. Well, if you're not giving freedom to the slaves, I will give you another freedom. but not freedom for you. But hineni, korei lachem deror noam Hashem, el hacherev, el hadever, el hara'av. You, so again, this is very poetic in a tragic way, you did not proclaim liberty to your brethren. I will give liberty to the sword, to the plague, to the famine. I will give them free reign over you. V'nasati etchem lizava. I will make you an object of horror. All the world will look at what happens to you and say, how horrible. Now again, there's something difficult here, because the pasuk seems to imply here that one reason for the Chorban is the failure to free the slaves, or taking the slaves back after they were supposedly freed, as opposed to Avodah Zarah, Gilarai, Shvichas Dam. So this is yet another Aveira that gets added into the equation. And behold, all of the people that violated my covenant. And apparently they did something like the Bris Bein Absarim. They cut an egel. Egel is not a golden calf. Egel, they cut a calf, and they walked between the two halves. That is the derech of Korsei Bris. And apparently they did this in the Beis HaMikdash itself. And they then violated the bris. And the Sari Yehuda, Sari Yerushalayim, Asarisim, HaKehanim, V'chol HaMaretz, HaOivrim ben B'Israel, they walked between the two halves. And they broke the bris, and they swore falsely. V'nosati Yisam b'yad oiveiim, I will deliver them into the hands of their enemies. Uviyad mevakshe nafsham, and those who want to take away their lives. V'haisa nivlasam l'meichel li'oif hashamayim u'lehem ha'aretz, and their dead bodies will be food for the birds of the heaven, the vultures, and the animals on earth. However, v'yas Sidkiyahu melech Yehuda v'yasarav, but Sidkiyahu, who tried at least to address this problem, indeed attained biyad oyeveim, I will deliver him to the enemies, but as we said before, he will not be killed. He will die b'derech kavod, uviyad mevakshe nafsham, ubiyad chel melech bavel ha'elam mi'aleichem. But again, it's different than the rest, that he will die b'derech kavod and respect. Hineni mitzaveh nom Hashem. But nevertheless, I am giving this message. Don't wage war against the Babylonians. Okay, let me go back a little bit. The end of Chaf Aleph says, I am delivering the city into the hands of the army of Melech Bavel, ha'olim me'alechem, who is leaving you right now. So this is actually alluding to an event that is not clearly described here, and that is, in the middle of Nebuchadnezzar's siege of Yerushalayim, he diverted his troops to go fight Paro in Mitzrayim. Tzidkiyahu and many of the other Yidden saw this as a gewaldige sign of rachamim, that Nebuchadnezzar's army is in retreat. The Navi is saying, you're wrong. I will deliver, Hashem says, I will deliver this city into the hands of the Chel Melech Bavel, who have temporarily left you, but they will be coming back after they conquer Mitzrayim, or at least fight Mitzrayim. Hineni mitzaveh noam Hashem. It is my command, Hashem says, v'hashivaisim eloir hazais. I will bring the Babylonians back to this city. V'nilchamu aleha, they will fight this city. Ulechadua, they will conquer this city. Usrafua ba'esh, and they will burn it with fire. V'yes orei Yehuda etain shemama miein Yoshev, and the other cities of Yehuda will become desolate, with no inhabitants. Do not make the mistake that because Nebuchadnezzar's army went to Mitzrayim to fight them, that they've forgotten about you, or they're going to be defeated in Mitzrayim. They're not. They are going to come back.